Hi guys, it's Mrs. Collins. So I am going to be going through the poem Island Man, which is on the school closures part of the website under English, and it's part of the packs for the poems from other cultures that you should be looking through for term 6. So just to kind of get your brains in gear a little bit, I want you to have a think about the question that you can see on the slide. How is the beach like a traffic jam? There's a range of answers that you can come up with. And it says, think of 5 adjectives to describe the beach and try and put them into sentences using a range of techniques to describe the traffic. So what I would suggest is that you pause this recording now and give yourselves maybe 2 or 3 minutes just to jot down some initial ideas. So what you could say perhaps is maybe that there is a sea of traffic, a sea of cars. You could say that there are as many cars as grains of sand on a beach or something along those lines. But there are many, many different examples. So we're going to be looking, as I said, at this poem called Island Man. You can find it on the school closures part of the website, so this is the one that we should be looking at, and we're going to be looking at some of the pages that are in the booklet, not all of them, just some of them that might kind of need a little bit more support. So the poem Island Man then, there it is, and it's in your booklet. The activities that I've got on this slide are not in your booklet. They're designed to kind of get you thinking a little bit more about the meaning and the imagery that is used in this poem. The copy of the poem that you can see in the booklet is on page 5, okay, and if you chose to, you could actually probably Google it, pop it in YouTube, and you could listen to a recording of this clip. It can be of this poem, and that's actually quite useful to do to kind of be able to hear it. So there are 3 tasks that I'd like you to do that are separate to the booklet that should help you to kind of understand it just that little bit more. So you could decorate around the edges, pictures, symbols and words that link to this poem. You could think of a different title for this poem, thinking about what you understand the poem to be about. And what are your first impressions about what the poem is about? Now, the beauty of poetry and the beauty of looking at a poem that you've not seen before is that you should be able to form your own opinions and your own ideas. And as we've talked about before, as long as you can support those ideas with evidence from the text and you can kind of support it with some kind of analysis, then actually it's really difficult to argue that you're wrong. So you could have something completely different to somebody else, and it doesn't mean that you've interpreted the poem the wrong way. Now, in the booklet, there's some work that you can do before you get to the poem around the author, Grace Nichols, and that would be really useful in helping you understand what the poem is about and the context surrounding it, and that will therefore help you understand the kind of meaning and perhaps what she was trying to get at. But what you take away from it could be slightly different, perhaps. So what I would suggest is that you spend about 10 minutes completing the 3 tasks that are on the slide. So I will pause the clip now. Okay, so when you've done that then, we need to start thinking in a little bit more detail about the subject matter of the poem. And this is linked to page 6 of your booklet around Island Man. So you can see that in your booklet, and I've got the same thing on the slide here, you've got a range of different parts and bits and pieces that you need to look at when we're analysing the subject matter. So you need to consider what happens in each section of the poem, what happens at the beginning, what happens at the middle, and what happens at the end. And the way that we travel through the poem is really important to consider because the writer, the poet, has made decisions about what we are introduced to at the beginning and how we're left at the end, what we're made to think about at the end, and what our lasting image is. And it's important that we think about why that might be. Can you think about what ways the poem is influenced by the social historical context of the poet? Who is the speaker in the poem? What are their views or experiences? What are the main themes in the poem? And what do you think the poet's main messages are? So, in a second, I will talk you through each of these and some of the ideas that you might have come up with. But what I would like you to do, first of all, is spend about maybe 5 to 8 minutes answering those questions and annotating your copy of the poem and working your way through that page 6 of the booklet. So I will pause the clip now and have a go. Okay, so obviously Isle of Man is actually quite a short poem, and it focuses on the cultural identity of a Caribbean man. And this Caribbean man wakes up in real-time London, but he's still dreaming about his native island. So the poem starts with the beginning of the Caribbean man thinking about being in the Caribbean, and gradually, as the poem goes on, he starts to wake up and wakes up to the realisation that he is in London. One of the main themes in this poem is the cultural split experienced by this Caribbean man, this individual. And there's a real contrast between the two different lives that he's led or is leading. Okay, he's got the island life, and then that's put in direct contrast or juxtaposes the city life. Okay, it's in juxtaposition with the city life, it contrasts it. Now, based on our knowledge of Grace Nichols and any research that you've done in the earlier pages of the booklet, we know that Grace Nichols could have based her poem on her actual real-life experiences of when she first came to the UK and London in 1977. She actually lived close to the busy North Circular Road that she describes in the poem, which is a big circular road around London, and the traffic noise reminding her of the sea surf back home in the Caribbean. The poem was first published in 1984 in the book The Fat Black Women's Poems, which concentrates on cultural divides from the female perspective, and it uses both Creole is Caribbean language, and English. One of the poems that you'll look at GCSE links to this kind of Caribbean culture and the idea of Creole as well. She said, "It's important for me to embrace both languages because of the constant interaction between the two cultures." Grace Nichols was born in Guyana in 1950. Despite this country being part of South America, it is closely tuned into Caribbean island culture with its historical links to Britain. So her poem relates to the experience of a man newly arrived in Britain's capital city, London. This man feels isolated, he feels lonely, and he still connects the new sounds and images that he is experiencing in London with his former home island life. He dreams the ideal, blue sky, an emerald isle, but in reality, he lives in a world that's surrounded by dull tarmac and by noisy traffic. If we think about the title, it's quite ambiguous. It could mean a number of different things. It's not very specific. This man now lives on the island of Great Britain, but was born on a Caribbean island. So Island Man doesn't necessarily mean he's linked to his connections of living in the Caribbean. It could actually be that he is still an island man because he's living in Great Britain and we're an island too. Essentially, he's torn between the two but belongs to both. He cannot ever forget his roots or his memories but has to live in the here and now to survive. The second stanza, or the next part of the poem, poetic paragraph, remember stanzas are poetic paragraphs, further elaborates this ideal image of the island life. The birds, the fishermen are actively working at sea, the sun personified is rising from the east and the direction of the new day, so this is the idea of a new beginning. It's got quite a personal touch. It's his emerald island, as if he were the owner. The last line of the second stanza sees a repeated groggly, groggly as he returns to reality. His mind isn't quite alert, he's still between the two worlds, his two cultures, as he wakes up. The first line of the third stanza combines the two. He returns from the island sands, but no, they're not island sands at all. They're grey and metallic and seem to rise. There's a surge of wheels, surge being a strong movement along the North Circular, a major road in London, which produces a dull roar. This contrast of sea and road, of surf and traffic, of ideal and reality is what makes the poem tick. The fourth stanza sees the man reluctantly heave himself out of bed. He knows he has to get on and maybe go to work in the city. Perhaps he even has to drive down the same road he hears when he wakes up in the morning, that North Circular road. The humdrum existence he lives is clearly a struggle for him. In his heart he longs to return to the paradise island of his birth. So, we move on then. So we've looked at this subject matter, the overall meaning, okay, and the links to historical context, but we now need to delve deeper, as I'm sure you know. So we turn to page 7 of your booklet. We then need to look at analysing the language. Now, you can see that on your page, you've got a list of different things that you need to identify, but it's going beyond just simply identifying them and starting to unpick why they're there. So you need to think about interesting or varied use of verbs, interesting or varied use of adjectives, interesting or varied use of nouns, how the poet uses similes or metaphors for effect, and it's that bit there. For effect. What is the effect? Why is that simile there? Why is that metaphor there? What is the writer trying to make us feel as we read it? How does the poet use alliteration, assonance and sibilants for effect? How does the poet use personification, onomatopoeia or oxymoron for effect? How does the poet use any other language device for effect? Now, if some of those language techniques are maybe a little bit baffling, if you've kind of maybe forgotten what they mean, that's okay. Okay, you don't have to concern yourself with all of that subject terminology to get high marks. It's about that interpretation and that analysis and what you do with it. So if you want to stick to verbs, adjectives and nouns and talk about the effects of those, you are absolutely entitled to do that and you won't be marked down massively for that, as long as your analysis and your exploration of the effects of those words is of a high level. So, as with the previous slide, I suggest that you pause this clip now, have a little think about what you can identify and pick out, think about what effects these things have, and then I will talk you through it in maybe 5 to 8 minutes. Give yourself that time. Okay, so some of the things that you might have chosen to pick out. The beginning. The poem starts off with a single word, morning. It's simple, it's direct, as if this is totally normal or something of kind of a revelation. So you can use how you interpret it. Either way, the scene is set. Here is the man waking up, the island man, which suggests that this is an independent person, isolated maybe, by himself. The poet uses 3 poetic devices very effectively. In the first stanza, you might have noticed the use of the verb breaking, and also the invented word wombing, both being used as verbs. These words suggest comfort, they suggest security, because they make you think of childhood and childbirth. They suggest the island man gradually emerging from his soothing dream, and he's emerging into this real world, almost like a baby being born. There are sounds and there's colours, the blue surf, the waves are breaking but only in his head. Mentally, he's far away in the Caribbean. The reader not yet aware of the contrasting physical reality. We do not know at this point that he's actually in London. The poet uses colour really effectively to paint contrasting or conflicting pictures of the Caribbean island and of London. At the beginning of the poem, the colours used to describe the Caribbean island are very bright. For example, we've got the blue surf, the emerald island. However, Towards the end of the poem, the colours used to describe London are very drab. For example, grey metallic saw and dull north circular. This is effective because it provides a good contrast between the past and the present, between living in the Caribbean and living in London. The colours provide clues about how the man feels. He's feeling happy and full of life in the Caribbean, sad and depressed in London. The reader is left with the impression that the present life in London is a poor substitute for his Caribbean past and therefore reflects this conflict that this island man is feeling. So, a little bit of analysis for you about language. I could go on, but we'll be here forever. So, next step then, perhaps the slightly more tricky element, is to start considering form and structure. So, in the same way, we're on page 8 of your booklet. You need to now be considering the number and length of stanzas, the number and length of lines, the syllable count, meter, rhythm, rhyme scheme. How does the use of punctuation affect the flow or meaning of the poem, and how does the poet use any other structural device for effect? This is page 8 of your booklet. Again, if some of these technicalities and some of these kind of technical phrases and techniques baffle you, or you've forgotten them, that's okay. Just focus on the ones that you do know. However, again, be aware that at no point in an answer about this poem should you just simply say, oh, Island Man has X amount of stanzas and X amount of lines, without telling me why or what the effect might be. That's not any useful information. I can see that for myself. Your examiner will be able to see that for themselves. So, again, in the same way, I would like you to just pause the clip and give yourself 5 to 8 minutes to jot down your ideas, thinking about the effect, about structure and form. And I will go through it all again in a minute. So, what you may have noticed is that the poem actually has no punctuation. And therefore, the reading of this poem can actually become more challenging. As we know, punctuation gives us direction in how to read something. There are natural breaks and there are natural pauses that occur, especially towards the end of the poem. The rhythms changing line by line, and the reader has to negotiate these line endings and these breaks, which slow the whole poem down from time to time. Island Man is what we call a free verse poem. Okay, so that's the idea that it doesn't actually have any specific rhyme, it doesn't have any specific meter, it doesn't have a rhyme scheme. It's got 5 stanzas and it's got 19 lines in total. Because there is no set rhyme scheme or meter, some line endings rhyme. For example, see, defiantly, groggily, saw, raw. This creates a kind of temporary feeling of familiarity. When we have a rhyme scheme, we as the reader think we kind of know what's going to happen next, and it creates this kind of sense of comfort. And if we've got these brief feelings of rhyme and sense of rhyme, like groggily, defiantly, see, saw, raw, it's that idea that he's briefly feeling at ease, briefly feeling comforted, okay? And that is that reflection of him being in that island life, but in that Caribbean life. But it's only brief because he's not there, he is in London. With no punctuation, the poem becomes quite informal, it becomes quite free-flowing, and the reader is challenged to pause at the right time and for the right length of time. It's almost like this is a stream of consciousness. Yeah? So how the Island Man is thinking is how it's being written in that kind of narration. The speaker observing this individual waking up from a dream, perhaps, with these images and sounds in his head. Make sure that you've made a note of the line length and the breaks in the lines. The second and third lines have the same number of syllables, but have a slightly different rhythm, and both flow into the shorter fourth line, where a natural caesura, a natural pause, makes the reader pause, and it almost reflects that break in the waves. The fifth line is interesting as it describes the waves breaking one by one, but what about the word wombing, a verb which suggests birth, home, motherhood, nurturing? It applies to the sea giving birth and safety, almost like a natural mother, We've got the use of repetition, Okay, so groggily, groggily, which signifies that the man is coming round in a slow, reluctant, unclear way, and it kind of reinforces the idea that he almost doesn't want to wake up. And again, muffling and muffling places emphasis on covering or softening action. The poet uses repetition to slow the pace of the poem down. It allows the reader to focus on the implications of the man waking from his dream. It suggests that the man has to accept the daytime reality of living in London, but in his dreams, he keeps alive the memories of living in the West Indies. So, to finish then, I would like you to complete this question as an answer for your teacher. So, how does Grace Nichols present the conflict between two cultures in the poem Island Man? And you can see that I've put the assessment objectives there. They are at the beginning of that booklet from Island Man that we've been working our way through. So we've talked about the different kind of feelings of conflict. We've got the difference between London life and the Caribbean. You need to make sure in this answer that you are talking about the how. And how means language, structure, form. What devices, what techniques are used by Grace Nichols to create this feeling of conflict. Okay, so we had the use of perhaps repetition, the use to change the pace as he's slowly starting to reluctantly wake up from London life. We've got the use of colour and how the colours change, the use of verbs and how the verbs change. We've got the use of the structure and how the pace slows right down. So there are a number of different things that you can select and make sure as well that you kind of talk about the why. Why is it that Grace Nichols perhaps is presenting this conflict in our Island Man? Good luck. Obviously, there are other bits and pieces in that booklet. I've just talked you through a few brief bits. Have a go at this question. I would suggest spending about half an hour on it. And then I would ask you to send it through to your teachers, and your teachers can give you some feedback. Good luck!